The capsule cracked open, and the announcer's voice turned my birthday into a sentence. My mother's cigarette hung a perfect inch of ash, refusing to fall, like the room forgot gravity. My knees went soft. Someone said my name, softly, like they were testing if I was still there. The zenith glowed that cold aquarium blue, and every face in the room was a reflection. 30 minutes earlier, the TV was just light on the shag carpet. Now, it was a mouth. Birthdays were turning into bullets. Families were holding their breath. To understand why that number buckled me, we need to go back to the living room. We were a suburban diorama, the kind you could find on any street in 1969. The zenith console hummed like a refrigerator. The silver knobs clicked when you brushed them, VHF, UHF, a kind of security blanket in chrome. The rabbit ears wore a crown of aluminum foil that my father insisted gave us New York quality, even though we lived 2 states away. The shag carpet was a field of wheat under that electric blue, flattened in paths we walked every night at 6. The TV's wood veneer was nicked where my brother once launched a matchbox car and learned about gravity the hard way. Mom was pacing with a dish towel, pressing it into her palms like she could wring the worry out. She'd stop behind the couch, fold it again, then find herself in the doorway and unfold it, like there was a right combination that would make the world behave. Dad had coffee at night, always did. He said it didn't touch him. He held the mug by the handle, but braced the bottom with his other hand, the don't spill on your lap stance he took when news got heavy. My brother clutched the family calendar like it was a life preserver. He'd circled birthdays in red and rehearsed them under his breath, like studying would influence the draw. Uncle Ray was already 2 fingers into his bourbon and trying not to look like it mattered to him, too. The room smelled like percolator coffee and last night's pot roast, with a thin thread of cigarette smoke that caught the TV light and turned it into weather. The macrame curtains my aunt made, big brown knots like rope on a ship, moved in a slow autumn draft, just enough to make the living room feel alive. The clock over the mantel clicked loud enough to mark each second like a list we didn't want to make. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's radio floated through a cracked window, a ball game drifting in and out like a memory. Inside, the announcer's test pattern chatter murmured from the TV, getting ready to become history. I tried on a smile I'd used at school when someone asked if I was worried. Nah, they'll probably pick me for catcher long before they pick me for anything else. It died before it cleared my teeth. There's a point when humor can't carry the load. Uncle Ray raised his glass to the screen and said, "All right, boys, be kind." And Mom shot him a look that said we were past jokes. He held his glass lower after that, like lowering it could lower the stakes. On the coffee table, my draft card lay face up like it had a heartbeat. The paper felt thinner now that it might be asked to do something. My class ring pressed into my finger, heavier than it ever was at the prom, and the calendar made a little hiss when my brother flipped to December, then back to July, then to March, then back again, like he was trying to confuse the future. Each square was its own tiny door, and we were about to find out which ones led to airports and which ones led to basements where radios played all night. The announcer's voice came clean through the little speaker, steady, official, unfriendly. He explained the rules we already knew, but somehow hearing them made the floorboards creak in a new way. December 1st, 1969, a jar with 306 blue capsules, each with a birthday tucked inside. They'd reach in, pull one, read it, reach in again. Over and over, millions of us in living rooms like ours would tally our futures by a voice that didn't know our faces. Is it true the low numbers go for sure? My brother asked, not looking up, tracing the outline of a square that wasn't mine. Nothing's for sure, Dad said, which was his way of telling the truth and protecting us at the same time. Mom stopped pacing and stood behind me, her hand on the back of the couch, fingers tapping a rhythm only she knew. That tap was the only sound when the announcer paused before the first draw. You could feel the bravado in the room like a coat that didn't quite fit. I sat straighter, like posture could pass for courage. Uncle Ray leaned forward and put his glass on a magazine to save the table. Dad took a sip. Mom's cigarette burned a clean, straight edge, the ash refusing to fall. The TV hum rose and fell, a tide against the base of the house. I remember thinking absurdly about the rabbit ears, the foil, the way the light made the creases look like mountains. If I adjusted them, could I adjust the night? The room had a way of pressing itself into your senses. The scratch of the sofa fabric on my wrists, the cool of the coffee table when I brushed it, the faint lemon oil on the cabinet from Saturday's cleaning, everything familiar and yet turned just a degree toward something that made my stomach feel hollow. Then they brought out the glass jar, blue capsules like tiny time bombs. The announcer's hand hovered, the camera framing a future you could hold. My mother's breath caught. My brother stopped tracing. My father set his mug down very carefully. And the TV, for once, wasn't just light. It was a verdict waiting to speak. December 1st, 1969. Funny how a date can turn into a room you never leave. The camera tightened on that glass jar, and the blue capsules shimmered like winter candy, harmless until someone called your month. They'd cooled them, people said, or warmed them or stacked them by mistake. Nobody on our couch knew what was true. We only knew the jar looked too clean to hold what it held. The announcer recited the instructions again, and his voice had that neutral weight you hear at the DMV. Except this time, the paperwork could swallow a year of your life. The hand reached in, deliberate, like a priest over a collection plate. A swirl of capsules knocked softly against glass. A polite sound for an impolite job. You could hear the scrape of a cufflink, the faint whisper of fabric when the arm moved. He held up the first capsule, twisted it open, and read a date. The house didn't move, but my ribs did. Somewhere on our block, a porch light clicked brighter. Somewhere else, a kitchen chair pushed back hard enough to leave a mark. They read another and another. The cadence fell into a mechanical rhythm. Reach, rattle, open, read. It felt like watching a metronome turn into a judge. I tried to breathe only on the in-betweens, like if I timed it right, I could slide past fate. Mom still hadn't let the ash fall. Dad kept his hands around his mug like it was a small engine he could steady with warmth. My brother's lips moved as he rewrote the family calendar in his head, swapping squares, rearranging luck. There were millions of us listening. You could feel it in the way the silence took up space, like the country had held one big church service in every living room at once. In Akron and Fresno and Hardin County, Ohio, boys who were men by law and children by habit stared at their own carpets. Someone's father stood with his back to the TV and didn't turn around. Someone else's mother whispered a prayer into her apron. A dorm lounge, somewhere sprawled with denim and boots and beer cans, trying to look like they didn't care, and a radio in a parked car flickered between static and fate. We'd learned the math. Low numbers, down there in the basement of 1 through 100, meant the phone would ring or a letter would land heavy in the mailbox. Anything below 120 turned your life into a calendar you didn't own. Above that, the world got foggier. Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe later. You became a weather report. Partly drafted with a chance of reprieve, we pretended the numbers were just numbers. But they weren't. They carried your name curled up inside them like a note in a bottle washing ashore. Uncle Ray cleared his throat and said, "If they call me, I'm moving to the garage." It was an old joke. He was too old, but he said it anyway to give us something that didn't hurt. Mom didn't look up. The announcer pulled another capsule. The jar sighed glass on glass, and the date landed like a pebble dropped into a well. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor's radio hiccuped, and a thin cheer slipped through the wall and died in our living room. We didn't begrudge them, but we felt it. The friction between relief and the knowledge that someone else's boy just got pushed to the front of the line. The camera angle changed. Closer on the hands, closer on the jar. I noticed the way the capsules knocked together as he stirred, like teeth chattering. For a second I imagined my birthday in there, bumping along, getting colder, then warmer, then caught near the top by a swirl. You start making rules in your head. If he turns his wrist left, it'll miss me. If Mom finally taps the ash, I'll be fine. If Dad coughs, the world resets. We're superstitious animals when our names are in other people's mouths. Another date? Not mine. Another? Still not. Sweat collected behind my knees where the couch cushion met my jeans, and the fabric left a waffle pattern on my forearms. The announcer's voice stayed flat, like a ruler. It made it worse. Give me a tremble, give me a crack, give me one sign that he understood he was reading from a deck with blood in it. Nothing. Only the neat procession, month, day, pause, next. Across the country, friends were marking down the sequence, making lists, calling out numbers in rented apartments with bad plaster and good company. Somebody's cousin, who never won a raffle, was sure his luck would turn cruel tonight, because that's how luck behaves. A girl somewhere wrote her boyfriend's birthday on her hand in ink and squeezed her fist as if she could hold the capsule shut from 1,000 miles away. And in our living room, the macrame curtains breathed in and out like they were keeping time with the jar. The pile of opened capsules grew just outside the shot, a little graveyard of plastic. I wondered if they'd throw them away or keep them in a box marked Used Fate. The absurdity kept me steady. I counted the seconds between draws, 4, 5, sometimes 6. The longer the reach, the worse the thud in my chest when the date arrived. My brother whispered, "Skip July, skip July," like he could argue with probability. Dad said nothing, which in our house meant he was saying a lot. The announcers said a friend's date. The name cracked out of my mouth before I told it to Tom, and Mom's hand found my shoulder like she could anchor both of us. Relief and guilt braided themselves so quickly I couldn't tell which was pulling harder. Tom lived 3 streets over. He taught me how to throw a curve with a tennis ball against a garage door. I pictured his family room, the exact same blue, the same rabbit ears, the same silence, breaking in a different way, and still the hand reached in, and still the jar answered, numbers piling into an order that would live in the bones of towns. It wasn't ceremony, not really. It was a ritual of chance performed by men in suits who'd go home to their own living rooms and sit in their own blue glow. But for us, it felt like the room had tilted just a few degrees, and we were all bracing our feet against the carpet, waiting to hear if our name would roll. Now the pauses felt longer. The room shrank around the coffee table like the house itself was leaning in to listen. I started counting heartbeats between draws, trying to line them up with the announcer's cadence. 4 beats for the reach, 2 for the rattle, 3 for the twist, 1 for the date. It didn't hold. Nothing held. My chest kept skipping steps like it heard a different song. I straightened my shoulders, rolled my neck, gave Dad a nod like I was trying out adulthood in front of a mirror. "Guess I'll finally see if these legs can handle boot camp runs," I said, as if I ran anywhere but from first to second and occasionally to catch a bus. The joke wobbled on its feet. Uncle Ray tried to help it along. He held up his glass toward the TV like it was a toll booth and said, "What's it going to take, gentlemen? I've got top shelf right here." He wiggled the ice so it clinked, then set the glass down quick when Mom cut him a sideways look that could break a rock. Nobody laughed. The bourbon kept its counsel. Next door, the neighbor's radio crackled, and a cheer lifted thin as thread. It hung over our hedge for a second, then snapped. Mom's thumb had found the mug handle, rubbing the same spot until the glaze would turn matte. Dad cleared his throat, a small cough that tried to sound casual and failed. His eyes stayed on the screen, but his jaw had set like a door wedged shut. My brother flipped to my month and pressed his finger on my day as if he could pin it down. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I could feel the heat of his hand from where I sat, like a small sun burning a circle into paper. He whispered, hold, the way he did when he watched a magician shuffle a deck and pretend not to stack it. The announcer reached in. I closed one eye to make the jar smaller. He swirled, opened, read. Not me. My stomach dropped anyway. Relief can feel like falling. You think it'll catch you. It doesn't. It just lets you land and then shoves you back into line. I caught myself bargaining with the air. If I made it to 30 draws without hearing July, I'd stop smoking in the garage. If I made it to 50, I'd go back to church with Mom at Christmas and not make faces during the hymns. If I made it to 100, I'd write letters to Tom every week if it came to it. The human brain loves a deal when it knows there isn't one on the table. Uncle Ray leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced like a kid in civics class trying to look serious. They say college helps, he murmured, almost to himself. They say teachers too. Dad didn't take the bait. He hated that kind of talk in front of me. He'd already had the quiet conversation with Mom at the sink about deferments, applications, options. They spoke in teaspoons and dishwater because they didn't want the words to be heavy enough to carry down the hall. Another cheer from somewhere down the street, closer this time, followed by a low murmur like a house exhaling. I wondered who it was. Jimmy with the Plymouth? Larry with the crew cut who always kept his lawn neat enough to shave with? The weird part was imagining their faces. Relief doesn't look noble. It's messy. It looks like your shoulders dropping and your tongue, suddenly remembering it, lives in your mouth. The silence in our living room had a texture now. You could feel it on your skin. The macrame swayed. The clock ticked. The announcer's voice kept drilling holes through the quiet and dropping dates down them. I watched the tiny vein in Mom's wrist pulse under her bracelet, and I timed 3 more draws to it before I got lost. My mind went to stupid places to keep from going to the right one. I counted ceiling tiles. I named every teacher I'd had since 4th grade. I tried to remember the lyrics to a song I only half knew, humming under my breath until my brother jabbed me with his elbow like, "I can hear your fear trying to sing." He wasn't wrong. The first of our own hit like a hammer. Not mine, but ours. Someone we saw every Friday at the diner, a boy who'd taught Sunday school and drove his mom to the A&P. The date slid out of the announcer's mouth in that same steady tone, and my own voice betrayed me. Oh, just that. My mother's hand landed on my shoulder, warm, steady, and squeezed with a rhythm that said, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here," even if here wasn't much. I wanted to stand up to walk it off like a turned ankle, but my legs had turned to furniture. The couch had me, the house had me, the country had me by a string tied to a number floating in a glass bowl. And then, because the world has a sense of timing you can't control, Uncle Ray tried one more time to pry a smile out of the room. He slid the bourbon toward the TV and said, "Tell you what, you skip July, I'll quit using you as a coaster." The glass left a ring on the magazine cover anyway. We all stared at that ring for a second, like it meant something. The announcer reached in again. I held my breath. The room didn't breathe with me. It had its own lungs now. Somewhere between the swirl and the twist, a prayer formed in the back of my throat. Half words, half noise. Not eloquent, not even full sentences. Just a sound you make when the future stands in the doorway and won't tell you if it's coming in. The first friend's date came out of that flat voice like a note slipped under a door. It wasn't mine, but it was close enough that my skin tightened. I said his name without meaning to, and Mom's hand pressed my shoulder again. Relief and guilt braided together. A rope that burned your palms either way you grabbed it. I could see his face as clear as the zenith glow. Him laughing in a parking lot. Him tossing me a ball. Him not laughing now. A look passed between Dad and me, quick and hot. We both knew what that kind of number meant. My fingers went numb like they'd been in snow too long. The cigarette Mom had balanced finally leaned, ash listing, but still wouldn't drop. It hung there like a dare. I watched the ember creep and thought of snow falling slow in a streetlight. How you can see every piece but can't stop the storm. The announcer didn't change tone. He didn't go sad or solemn. He didn't do anything but keep rhythm. It made it worse. A monotone can slice deeper because you can't blame it on drama. So the bargaining began, the internal arithmetic nobody admits out loud. I ran through it like a ledger. Deferments if college took, maybe a teaching route, maybe a medical reason, maybe luck. I tried to stack the maybes until they looked like a wall. They didn't. They kept falling over, and under them was the same floor and the same jar. You start doing math with vowels and breath, like if you don't say your month, you can't summon it. Another cheer drifted through the wall, a little louder this time. We all paused, as if hearing someone else's relief required a bow. It didn't feel wrong to hear it. It felt human. But I swallowed hard because every cheer is an echo. It bounces back as somebody else is quiet. I wondered who'd be coming to school tomorrow with a new weight in his walk. I wondered how long it takes a mother to learn the shape of that weight. The laughter had drained out of our house by then. Even Uncle Ray let the bourbon sit without comment. The hum of the set and the counting, month, day, next, were the only sounds bold enough to stay. The macrame kept breathing in the draft, and I started counting its sways instead of the capsule rattles just to give my mind a different set of rails. They pulled another, and the voice landed a number in the low valley where certainty lives. I saw Dad's jaw shift, just a click, like a transmission finding a lower gear. Somewhere across town, I knew a phone would ring. Somewhere in our town, a father would tighten a belt he hadn't worn in years and take a walk around the block because kitchens aren't big enough for that kind of news. This was how the map changed, not with lines, but with faces. Then came the date of the second boy in our little orbit, a friend of a friend, the kind of kid who shows up in your summer like a guest star. This time, my body had the memory ready. Fingers numb again, breath shallow. The cigarette ash finally surrendered and fell, a soft gray feather onto the glass ashtray, and Mom tapped the filter like she'd negotiated it. A small victory in a room with none to spare. The announcer's cadence started to feel like an assembly line. Reach, rattle, twist, read. It was almost soothing if you forgot the product. I couldn't forget. Not with the calendar on my brother's lap vibrating like a trapped bird. He'd started writing tiny numbers next to dates, order of draws, marking the world in sequence the way kids draw tallies on prison walls and cartoons. The human impulse to count is strong when you can't control. I caught myself thinking about the ones who'd already gone, boys a year ahead of me who came back with haircuts that didn't look like ours anymore, with stares that landed past your shoulder. We'd all learned to read letters for what they didn't say. It's hot meant something. Food's not bad meant something else. The counting in our living room wasn't just about a call. It was about the kind of words you'd write with a flashlight on your bed, and whether you'd have to learn to write them. Another date, and my month bobbed up like a cork, then slipped away. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd kept since spring. You stop measuring time by how close the voice comes to your day. A week either side feels like the sun leaning toward your house and then stepping back. We were deeper now. The pile of spent capsules must have been huge just out of frame, a blue plastic mountain that used to be possibility and now was history. The room seemed to understand. The walls had drawn closer. Even the clock had lowered its tick, respectful for once. The country's breath was still synced up with ours. At least that's how it felt. Millions listening for a number and hearing a name. And then the air changed in that small way it does before a storm. The announcer's hand paused a half-second longer at the rim of the jar. He dipped, swirled, found one, and that voice, flat as a ruler, read the date that lived in my bones. My month, my day, plain as Tuesday, heavy as lead. Mom's hand tightened. Dad didn't move. My brother's pencil stopped dead on the square he'd been shading darker and darker, like he'd been trying to erase the future by coloring it in. Everything went thin and loud at the same time, like stepping from a warm room into winter air. The date sat there on the announcer's tongue, clinical as a chart. My ears rang, a bright whine that erased the room's small sounds. The clock, the macrame sigh, the neighbor's radio. The zenith glow went two bright, bleaching edges. The sofa fabric turned scratchy under my palms, a burlap reminder that I was still sitting here, that I wasn't a photograph, that someone could slide back into a drawer. Mom's hand found my shoulder and stayed. Not a squeeze now, just wait. Dad nodded once, a small, almost invisible movement, like a captain acknowledging a wave. My brother let the pencil roll off his knee. It bounced on the carpet and didn't make a sound, like even gravity had the decency to go quiet. I tasted metal, the way you do when you bite your lip without knowing. Relief came first, a flash, because the number wasn't down in the ditch with certainty, but it came wrapped in dread so tight they were the same temperature, safe-ish. That was the shape of it. Not a bullseye, not a clean miss. The gray band where you start doing math you hate. I tried to pull breath into my ribs and found there wasn't much room. The announcer read the next date, then the next, like he hadn't just rewired my house. I heard him from far away, like a radio in a different apartment. In that gray zone, the mind becomes a ledger clerk. Semesters. Could I string together enough to keep the letters from coming? Work. Was there a job that counted more than my birthday? Teach? Study? Serve? And if serve, could you choose the shape of that service, or did you get shaped instead? I laid futures next to each other the way Dad lined up his wrenches, by size, by use, by how much they hurt your knuckles. Mom's thumb traced a circle on my shoulder. It wasn't soothing exactly. It was a language. We'll talk when the set turns off. We'll pour coffee we don't need. We'll fold the dish towel again. Dad cleared his throat, but didn't speak. He taught me to drive with two hands and to keep my eyes farther down the road than the hood, and now he was driving this moment with me. Both of us gripping, both of us pretending the wheel had more to say than it did. My brother finally risked a look at my face. His eyes were shiny, but proud too, like I'd won something you don't want to win, but still counts in a certain kind of scorekeeping boys do when they don't have words. He tried for a grin and landed on a grimace. Middle, he said. You're in the middle. As if naming it gave us a foothold. He was right. And the middle is where your life splits into columns. I felt a line draw itself inside me, before and after, ink so quiet you might miss it if you didn't know the sound of your own heart. Before was the hallway at school that smelled like floor polish and ink and girls' hairspray, my locker door that always stuck, the way the baseball diamond looked at dusk. After was a calendar that could turn into marching orders, a map where airports had new meanings, where the word orders moved from TV shows into the kitchen. Uncle Ray picked up the bourbon and set it down without drinking. That was his apology. He leaned back, exhaled, and said, "All right." Not much, but it landed. Mom finally tapped her cigarette, and the ash collapsed into the glass tray with a respectful hush. The silly thought flashed. What if the ash had fallen earlier? Would my number have landed differently? We're ridiculous animals. We reach for any lever that lets us pretend we're not strapped into the ride. The announcer kept going. The jar kept giving. Names kept attaching to numbers all over town. We just couldn't hear them yet. I tried to pull my own name off the date and failed. You don't get that luxury, not tonight. It sticks like burrs to a sock. I looked down at my hands. They'd steadied. It surprised me. Maybe the body understands the middle better than the mind does. Fight or wait. Those are the choices. I could feel the weight taking its seat beside me. Dad finally spoke. "We'll look at options," he said, eyes on the screen. Not a promise, not a lie, a road sign. Mom added, "You'll eat," which in our house meant we'll keep the rituals that keep us human. My brother reached for the pencil again and wrote the order number beside my birthday in the tiniest script, like he could make it smaller by making it smaller. Relief kept sneaking in, rude and necessary. Relief that I wasn't already in the chute. Relief that I wasn't calling Tom's mother tonight to say anything at all. Guilt arrived right behind it, carrying its own suitcase, guilt that my lungs still filled easy, that my feet were still on shag and not sand. You learn fast how to carry two heavy things at once without dropping either. The TV light softened as the camera pulled wider. The jar looked less like a machine and more like a bowl you might put on a holiday table if you didn't know what it could do. The country kept breathing. I kept listening, and somewhere between the next draw and the one after, the house remembered how to be a house. The hum turned back into a hum. The macrame swung because of winter air again, not destiny. My number had landed. It hadn't finished landing yet. That would take days, but it was on the ground. So was I. When the set finally went dark, the room kept its shape like the TV glow was still painted on the walls. Nobody spoke first. Mom gathered the ashtray, then put it back without emptying it. Dad reached for the power knob like a man touching a sleeping dog, slow, careful, then let his hand fall. The jar was still in my head, capsules clicking. I needed air that didn't smell like coffee and fear. I stood, and the house felt smaller than it ever had. "I'm going around," I said. Dad nodded like that was the right verb. Mom said, "Wear a jacket," which meant she was still my mother and I was still her boy, no matter what numbers thought. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside into the cold that makes your teeth feel tall. The block had its own weather tonight. Porch lights burned steady, little beacons over concrete steps with paint peeling at the edges. You could hear murmurs through hedges, low voices and kitchen tones, the kind you use when you don't want the walls to gossip. A dog in the distance barked twice and decided against a third. Somewhere, a screen door coughed, then closed soft, respectful. Driveways held secrets like parked cars do after midnight. I passed Jimmy's Plymouth, the one he tuned like it was a girlfriend. The hood was cold. His house had only the living room lit, and figures moved across the window like slow fish in a tank. On the corner, Mrs. Wallace stacked pie tins in her trash with a gentle clatter that sounded like spoons tapping a glass at a wedding. We kept making normal sounds to prove the world could still do normal. The air tasted like chimney smoke and November's leftover leaves. A newspaper lay half unspooled on a stoop, rubber band, cutting into the gray. I wondered how tomorrow's headline would fit the night into a font. Some things shouldn't be set in type. They should be carried. I turned up Maple, where the streetlight turned everything the color of old coins. Two boys from down the block stood on a curb, hands dug in pockets, boot heels making nervous half circles in the gravel. They nodded at me like we were all members of a club nobody applied to. Above them, Mr. Baker's porch light flicked on, then off, then on again, as if he couldn't decide whether Hope needed electricity. When I got back to our house, the kitchen table had transformed into a command center. The calendar was spread like a map. Mom had a pen that clicked like a metronome, circling names, writing the order numbers tiny beside birthdays as if smaller ink meant gentler truths. Dad had the phone in front of him and stared at it like he could will it to ring only for good reasons. We started the inventory, not like rationing, not clinical, human. Tom, low. Jimmy, higher, but not high enough to strut. Larry, middle with me. Cousin Pete, floating up near safe air. We said the names softly, like reading a roll call for a class that would never meet the same way again. Each name had a face attached, a car, the sound of a laugh, the way a jacket sits on a set of shoulders. Aunt Sylvia arrived through the back door like she always did, carrying a pie she must have baked while the jar was still swallowing birthdays. "Lucky socks," she said, wiggling her ankles beneath a sensible skirt. "I wore 'em. Been wearing 'em since 43. They work." Dad raised one eyebrow, the one he reserved for folk remedies and extended warranties, and the corner of his mouth tilted up a fraction. A small mercy. Humor snuck in on tiptoe and didn't make a scene. We poured coffee we didn't need and cut pie we weren't hungry for because forks scraping plates can sound like solidarity if you do it together. The first bite sat heavy, sweet, and stubborn. Uncle Ray chastened, lifted his cup of coffee like a peace offering. "To the middle," he said. "To the ones we'll write. To the ones we'll wait for." We clinked ceramic. It sounded like tiny bells. The phone rang, the way a phone rings when it knows it's part of a story. Dad answered on the first note, voice calm, chin high. "We saw. We're here," he said, then listened. You could tell who it was by the way his shoulders rose, then steadied. He said, "We'll come by," and hung up. No. One asked who. We already knew the street, the worn spot on their porch step, the creak on their third stair. Maps redrew themselves in pencil that night. Routes to school, to church, to the corner store, all acquired detours. House to house, plate to plate, shoulder to shoulder. Kids older than me looked ancient on their own stoops, a year stretched into a decade in the set of their jaw. Kids younger than me looked like kids again, cartoons still stitched to their pajamas. Mothers moved like ushers at a theater nobody wanted tickets to, guiding us to seats where we could see each other's faces. By the time I stepped back out onto the porch to breathe, the sky had turned the soft gray that lives between midnight and morning. The neighborhood had quieted to its bones. Somewhere, a flag tapped its pole with a hollow ring. Somewhere else, a boy counted ceiling cracks and tried to fold sleep around a new shape. Morning would bring the new map of our town. Tonight, we learned how to walk it. Together, one porch light to the next. Morning put names to what the night had only hinted at. Word traveled in the old ways, porch to porch, store to store, through a barber's swivel chair and a church vestibule that smelled like paper and wax. By lunch, our town had a new ledger. Tom was first on everyone's lips. Low number, no wiggle room. He stood on his mother's porch with his hands jammed in his Letterman jacket, trying to look like a postman had delivered the wrong package. I walked over and stood beside him without saying much. We talked about nothing, the way you do when everything is obvious. "Curveball still breaks," he said, eyes on the sidewalk. "Yeah," I said. "It did. It would." By afternoon, Jimmy had gone quiet in the garage with the Plymouth hood up, tightening bolts that didn't need tightening. He'd been drawn down in the rough water, but not slammed into the rocks. He started saying "if," like a comma. If they take me, if they don't, if I choose it first. Some boys made that calculation fast. Join to choose your branch, your job, your odds. He talked to a recruiter in a crisp shirt who showed him glossy photos that looked like postcards and never smelled like anything. "At least I'll pick the door," Jimmy said, grease on his knuckles, jaw set. Picking the door felt like a kind of dignity. Larry didn't pick a door so much as vanish through one. His number slid under the line, and 2 nights later, he stopped showing up anywhere you'd expect him. Someone said they saw him at the bus station with a duffel and a paperback, looking like he'd memorized a map nobody was supposed to have. The rumor said, Canada. Rumors always do. I caught sight of his mother at the A&P staring at the cereal like it contained coordinates. She kept putting the same box in and out of her cart like she was practicing a goodbye. We didn't judge, not really. The roads we take are built out of numbers we didn't ask for. On campus, the protest calendar started filling as fast as the draft boards. A kid with a megaphone who shook when he spoke tried to make his hands hold still by clenching the cardboard sign harder. "Not our war," he said, voice cracking on the hour, which is where the argument always lives. We went to hear speakers who sounded like prophets one day and salesmen the next, and we stood at the edges trying to be useful without inviting a camera. The ones with low numbers kept their heads down or their heads up, depending on what the week required. The ones in the middle learned to nod like we understood all sides because all sides wanted something from us. At the barbershop, the air smelled like talc and tonic, and the radio hissed between baseball scores and body counts. Men's voices stayed low until they didn't. Someone would say, "My nephew," and the room would go tender around that word. The barber kept cutting hair like it was a normal Saturday. But when a headline rolled past, his hands paused a fraction of a second, and you noticed because the scissors stopped singing. Across town, the church bulletin put names on a prayer list that read like a class roster, first names only, everyone pretending there weren't that many Toms in one pew. Letters started to arrive with military postmarks that looked like stamps from a different planet. The boys who left wrote in sentences that got shorter as the month stacked. Food's not bad. Heat's a beast. We had a laugh. You learned to read the shape of silence between those lines. You learned which jokes were real and which were scaffolding. On Saturdays, we'd gather at someone's kitchen table and pass a letter around like a relic, fingerprints smudging the corner, all of us memorizing the same sentence so we could say it to someone's mother later without getting it wrong. And then there were the ones who came back. The first returnee I knew personally stepped off a bus with a duffel that knocked his knee because he'd forgotten how to walk around it. His hair wasn't the same, sure, but it was the eyes that told the story. The way they checked corners in a room with no corners. He hugged his sister like the ground might give, and he laughed loud, too loud, then not at all. We had a welcome home where we burned burgers and pretended the old jokes still fit. He smiled polite and drifted toward the fence where the sound was softer. "Good to see you," I said. "Good to be seen," he said, and I felt how honest that was. Families grew new muscles. Mothers learned to talk about mail like weather. Fathers carried quiet like it weighed something. Brothers measured time by envelopes and calls. By the way, a voice sounded when it had to be brave on a line that might be listening. The little flags at school flew at half-staff more than seemed fair, and the announcement man learned the shape of grief in his mouth. At basketball games, the band still played the fight song, and for a minute we could pretend ages lined up again, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, before life's other system took over. The rite of passage we'd counted on, driver's tests, diplomas, first jobs, got compressed into that one December night. Innocence traded places with clarity. The trade wasn't even. It never is. We learned that friendship can mean sitting on a porch saying nothing right or driving a mother to the post office because holding a letter sometimes takes two people. We learned to carry each other's numbers when our own felt light by comparison, the way you take the heavy bag from a friend without making a show of it. Years later, you can still hear the capsules rattle if you stand at the right corner in your mind. You can hear the announcer's cadence when a phone rings after dinner. You can feel the porch lights warming the block like a string of lanterns stretched across water. We didn't all take the same road, but those roads braided. They still do. And if you want to know what held us up, it wasn't certainty. It was hands. It was names. It was the way a town learns to say we and mean it. The number didn't leave when the camera pulled back. It took a drawer in my room, right beside the socks and the coins from summer jobs. That drawer turned into a museum you don't show people. My draft card, edges soft from being handled too much. A photocopied lottery list, folded into a tight square like I could compress destiny by creases. The family calendar page with my date circled twice, once from before, once from after, faded to the color of old tea. Every time I opened that drawer, I could hear the jar again, a small clatter under my ribs. Life didn't freeze, it forked. You learn how a number rearranges your days without changing the weather. I still went to class. I still burned grilled cheese too often. I still kissed a girl in a hallway that smelled like chalk and spearmint. But I walked into quiet rooms differently, slower, as if light held news. I counted semesters like a mason counts bricks, laying them careful, measuring the mortar, checking plumb. When I signed my name on course forms, the pen felt heavier, as if ink could tip scales. Some of us started carrying invisible clipboards. We knew who sat in the low valley. We knew who floated up in the high clouds. We knew the boys like me, mud gray between, who learned to sleep on a slope. Our conversations acquired new currents underneath the old ones. You going home this weekend? Meant, are you holding it together? You hear from Tom? Meant, tell me gently. You see Jimmy? Meant, did he pick a door yet? And was it the one he wanted? I made a kind of homework out of surviving on purpose. I showed up at hospitals with flowers that didn't know the names of machines. I learned to fold a flag with my hand steady, the fabric whispering as it turned. I stood next to mothers who hugged like they were trying to keep a shape from escaping. I wrote letters that sounded like bridges, sentences built to carry weight. You'd be proud. You'd laugh at this. I saw your dad fix the gutter and curse like it owed him money. I learned to tell the truth without drawing blood if I could help it. When Tom's first letter came, my chest went hot and cold at once. He wrote small to fit more on a page. He apologized for the paper, like the paper had feelings. He said the heat made folks mean, and the nights made them friends again. He said the coffee tasted like a dare. He said, tell Coach I finally learned to run. I read it twice, then 3 times, then read it to Mrs. Ellis on her porch steps, my voice steady the way you hold a glass full to the lip. Years took on a rhythm. You'd think time would stretch after a night like that, but it found a backbeat and stuck with it. Reunions began to happen. The first one felt like breaking into the old school after dark. We wore the same jokes like jackets. We didn't fit them anymore, but we loved that they existed. We made calls on birthdays we used to ignore. We started counting by dates in a different way. The day somebody came home, the day somebody didn't, the day somebody walked into the grocery like a normal man and stared too long at the oranges. Uncle Ray kept his bourbon, but it changed jobs. He learned toasting. Birthdays turned into small declarations, not numbers you flinched at. To you, kid, he'd say, clinking with a grin that had apology tucked in the corner. We laughed easier at the old coaster joke. We let it be a trick we survived together. Sometimes I'd see 2 old men nod at each other in the cereal aisle. No names, just that look, like a secret handshake performed with eyes. It's not about being veterans or not, drafted or dodged, high or low. It's about having lived in a country that shook one night and deciding to keep your balance for the person next to you. You nod to say, I know the rattle. You nod to say, I still hear it some mornings too. Careers happened, marriages, divorces, children who borrowed your face and your stubbornness. The number reached into those rooms quietly, the way a draft does under a door. I took a job that kept me near people because solitude made the jar louder. I married a woman who could read my pauses and hand me a glass of water at the exact second before I needed one. We had a son who asked simple, surgical questions. We had a daughter who drew on the calendar in colors, turning squares into tiny flags and suns until the page looked like hope. Every so often, the old knight would try to climb back onto the couch. Sound triggers, a flat voice on a radio calling out a sequence, the clink of glass on glass, the soft drag of a curtain in winter air. I learned to answer those sounds with others. Dinner plates, baseball on a Sunday, my father laughing at a joke he'd heard a dozen times. You curate your own museum of counter noises. It helps. Meaning didn't arrive in a sermon, it arrived in errands. Buying milk for a neighbor who couldn't. Walking a dog for a man who limped now on damp days. Holding a door longer than necessary and noticing the person's thanks land on you like a warm coin. We learned birthdays carry weight. We learned hands can hold it. And if anybody asks, I tell them, the number never leaves your drawer. But it becomes a compass, not for where you're going, for who you're going with. There's a drawer I open like church. Bottom right of the old dresser, the one with a stubborn runner that squeaks like a mouse. Inside lives the yellowed card, thin as a whisper, edges browned, the typewriter's ghost faint, but still insisting. It gives a little when you pick it up, a paper that learned to bend without breaking. I don't show it to many people. It's not a relic for display. It's a handshake with a younger version of me who still sits on a scratchy sofa, breathing in TV light. I've got a ritual. No big deal. No speech. I sit on the edge of the bed where the Wood is polished by decades of knees, and I lay the card on my palm like I'm checking a pulse. That crease down the middle, my old road, wasn't there at first. I made it from opening and closing, deciding and undeciding, practice for choices that didn't come with guarantees. My hands are older now. Spots like spilled coffee, knuckles a little knobbier. They're steadier too. Age does that. Fear burns hot and quick. Time burns low and even. When I fold it once, the room changes temperature. That's when I hear the hum again. Not loud, just thread. The old zenith isn't here, but its glow is. I can feel shag under my feet, even though this house has hard wood. Mom's mug returns to my mind. The arc her thumb wore smooth on the handle as she rubbed a circle you couldn't see, but we all felt. Dad's cough shows up, that pretend casual sound he used to keep the air from getting brittle. They walk in without walking in. That's what memory does when you give it a ceremony. Every now and then, my grandson wanders in at the exact wrong right moment, hair shooting in directions gravity doesn't recognize, questions stacked behind his eyes. "Is that a ticket?" he asked once, pointing at the card like it could take us somewhere fun. "Yes, kiddo," I said, patting the bed. "One we didn't ask for." He frowned because he knows tickets are supposed to be cotton candy and lights, not numbers and silence. I told him it's a kind of pass that let us learn how to stand next to people when standing mattered. I don't soft soap it for him. I don't dramatize it either. I tell him boys turned into extensions of their birthdays one night, and some came home with new maps in their eyes. I tell him we built a net out of casseroles and car rides and quiet jokes that didn't quite land but kept us human. He nods and asks if we had video games. I laugh because that's how the world heals, by adding new noises to old rooms. Then I show him how to fold the card along the crease without cracking it. He is careful in a way that makes me proud. The card carries a weight that shifts with the years. Early on it was a coin in my pocket I couldn't stop touching. Later, it turned into a compass I checked before big decisions, not for direction, but for company. Who will stand here with me? That's the question the card asks. Lately, it's more of a promise. When I touch it, I hear names: Tom, Jimmy, Larry, and I say them out loud sometimes because names said out loud stay in the room a little longer. I made an oath to myself a long time ago with that paper as my witness. To remember the boys whose numbers were small, to show up for birthdays and funerals and the ordinary Tuesdays that need a little shoring up, to live big where they couldn't, not as penance, as gratitude. It isn't heavy-handed. It's groceries and phone calls and sitting in hospital chairs that squeak when you lean back. It's teaching my grandson how to write a letter and how to spot when a person needs to be asked twice, "You okay?" Sometimes, before I slide the card back, I let it rest on the dress's cool wood and I count to 10, slow. 10 for the friends who taught me how to carry weight without scuffing the floor. 10 for the porches and the pie and the ash that finally fell. Then the card goes home. The drawer closes like a sigh, and for a minute the house glows with that old aquarium blue, not ominous anymore, just a reminder that one night taught us how to look at each other and stay. Some nights stay lit forever. That December evening taught us that a birthday could become a burden and a bond. We learned how silence can sound like courage, how hands can hold what words can't. The jar's rattle faded, but its echo shaped the way we walked through every room after, slower, gentler, with more eyes open. Time moved on, but we carried it forward. The coffee cups, the calendars, the names. Every generation inherits its own kind of draft, its own jar of chance. Ours taught us that ordinary lives can bear extraordinary weight and still reach for each other in the dark. If you can still feel that blue glow from the old zenith, you're one of us. Pull up a chair. Subscribe for the next story that remembers what the world tried to forget, because some echoes deserve to be heard again.